All right. I don't know if anybody can hear me. Not even anybody here right now, but who knows? That could change. Sorry about the terrible quality of my camera. It's pretty old. It's just kind of crappy. It's like my laptop onboard camera. Anyway, today I'm going to read a couple chapters from 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos by Jordan B. Peterson. And I'm going to read a couple chapters every day just because it gives me something to do. And maybe somebody will get something out of it. Forward. Rules. More rules? Really? Isn't life complicated enough? Restricting enough? Without abstract rules that don't take on our unique individual situations into account? And given that our brains are plastic and all develop differently based on our life experiences, why even expect that a few rules might be helpful to us at all? People don't clamor for rules, even in the Bible, as when Moses comes down from the mountain after a long absence, bearing the tablets inscribed with the 10 Commandments, and finds the children of Israel in revelry. They'd been Pharaoh's slaves and subjects to his tyrannical regulation for 400 years. And after that, Moses subjected them to the harsh desert wilderness for another 40 years, to purify them for their slavishness. Now, free at last, they are unbridled and have lost all control as they dance wildly around an idol, a golden calf, displaying all manner of corporeal corruption. I've got some good news, and I've got some bad news, the lawgiver yells to them. Which one do you want first? The good news, the hedonists reply. I got him from 15 commandments down to 10. Hallelujah, cries the unruly crowd. And the bad? Adultery is still in. Yeah. You're all going to die for sex. So rules, there will be, but please, not too many. We are ambivalent. So rules there will be, but please, not too many. We are ambivalent about rules, even when we know they are good for us. If we are spirited souls, if we have character, rules seem restrictive, an affront to our sense of agency and our pride in working out our own lives. Why should we be judged according to another's rules? And judged we are. After all, God didn't give Moses the 10 suggestions, he gave commandments. And if I'm a free agent, my first reaction to command might be just that anybody, not even God, tells me what to do, even if it's good for me. But the story of the golden calf also reminds us that without rules, we quickly become slaves to our passions. And there's nothing freeing about that. When you think about it, it's true because, I don't know if anybody's ever been, taken over by drug use or whatever kind of addiction you might have in your life. But I know that whenever I've gone, head over heels for alcohol or drugs or anything like that, it gets out of hand. When you become so addicted to something that all you want to do is chase that or, feel the feeling that it brings for you, then that's all you're doing and your life becomes miserable because if you don't have it, then you're not getting that dopamine rush. And, that's what a natural dopamine rush is you get it when you accomplish something that you've been striving to do, something you've been really struggling to get done. So you've been digging this hole for a month, and it's you're almost there, you're just about to get there, you finally get that last piece done, and dude, you lay down and you just feel freaking amazing. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I think everybody's probably had a situation like that, unless you're a toddler, where you finally finish that one freaking thing and it's just awesome, and you're like, sucker! Suckers, plural, or whatever. Anyway, that's how I feel about that. And the story suggests something more. Unchaperoned and left to our own untutored judgment, we are quick to aim low and worship qualities that are beneath us. In this case, an artificial animal that brings out our own animal instincts in a completely unregulated way. The old Hebrew story makes it clear how the ancients felt about our prospects for civilized behavior in the absence of rules that seek to elevate our gaze and raise our standards. One neat thing about the Bible story is that it doesn't simply list its rules, as lawyers or legislators or administrators might. It embeds them in a dramatic tale that illustrates why we need them, thereby making them easier to understand. Similarly, in this book, Professor Peterson doesn't just propose his 12 rules. He tells stories, too, bringing to bear his knowledge out of many fields as he illustrates and explains why the best rules do not ultimately restrict us, but instead facilitate our goals and make for fuller, freer lives. And it's true, like, think about it. When you have goals and you accomplish them, like I said, dopamine rush, yeah, I'm saying dopamine rush. And then, when you when you've got structure, things in your life that you're doing on a regular basis, I'm way happier, dude. When I have a regular sleep time, I go to bed at 8, I wake up at 5, and I'm happy. You know what I mean? If I'm just all willy-nilly falling asleep in whatever gutter at whatever time, waking up wherever, whenever, it's horrible. It sucks. And that stuff leads to addiction because you're chasing happiness. There's so much that goes into that, but I'm just gonna leave it at that because otherwise we're never gonna get this book read. Can't tell I'm pretty excited. I really, really like Jordan. He's really helped me a lot in my life. And even if nobody sees this, at least I got it out and, it's out there for people to potentially. Because I feel like maybe me reading it and sort of going over the topics and the key parts in it might help people to be, to be entertained by it. It might give them, breathe the life into it for them that has been breathed into me just by, reading it. Because it really, really does change my life. It helped me a lot. Anywho, wiki. Yeah. The first time I met Jordan Peterson was on September 12th, 2004, at the home of two mutual friends. TV producer Wojtek Zemberg, sorry if I mispronounce those, I'm not Polish, and medical internist Estera Bekier. It was Wojtek's birthday party. Wojtek and Estera are Polish. I was right, it was Polish. Immigrants who grew up with the Soviet Empire where it was understood that many topics were off limits, and that casually questioning certain social arrangements and philosophical ideas, not to mention the regime itself, could mean big trouble. I think that's pretty clear. It's obvious, in Russia there's certain things, especially back right after the Cold War, you say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, you could end up in the wrong place or dead, unalived. Anyway, but now, host and hostess luxuriated in easygoing, honest talk by having elegant parties devoted to the pleasure of saying what you really thought and hearing others do the same, in an uninhibited give and take. Here the rule was speak your mind, and if the conversation turned to politics, people of different political persuasions spoke to each other, indeed looked forward to it, in a manner that is increasingly rare. Sometimes Wojtek's own opinions or truths exploded out of him as did his laugh. Then he'd hug whoever had made him laugh or provoked him to speak his mind with greater intensity than even he might have intended. This was the best part of those parties, and the frankness in his warm embraces made it worth provoking him. Meanwhile, Estera's voice lilted across the room on a very precise path towards its intended listener. Truth explosions didn't make the atmosphere any less easygoing for the company. They made for more truth explosions, liberating us, and more laughs, and making the whole evening more pleasant. Because with de-repressing Eastern Europeans like the Zemberg-Bekiers, you always knew with what and with whom you were dealing. And the frankness was enlivening. Honoré de Balzac, the novelist, once described the balls and parties in his native France, observing that what appeared to be a single party was always really two. In the first hours, the gathering was suffused with bored people posing and posturing, and attendees who came to meet perhaps one special person, who would confirm them in their beauty and status. Then, only in the very late hours, after most of the guests had left, would the second party, the real party, begin. Here the conversation was shared by each person present, and open-hearted laughter replaced the starchy airs. At Estera and Wojtek's parties, this kind of wee hours of the morning disclosure and intimacy often began as soon as we entered the room. Wojtek is a silver-haired, lion-maned hunter, always on the lookout for potential public intellectuals, who know how to spot people who can really talk in front of the TV camera, and who look authentic, because they are. The camera picks up on that. He often invites such people to these salons. That day Wojtek brought a psychology professor from my own University of Toronto, who fit the bill. Intellect and emotion in tandem. Wojtek was the first to put Jordan Peterson in front of a camera and thought of him as a teacher in search of students. because he was always ready to explain, and it helped that he liked the camera and that the camera liked him back. Ooh, camera, getting down on some Jordan BP, huh? Hell yeah, like some Jordan BP. Ooh. Anywho, that afternoon there was a large table set outside in the Zemberg-Beckyer's garden. Around it was gathered the usual collection of lips and ears, loquacious virtuosos. We seemed, however, to be plagued by a buzzing paparazzi of bees, and there was this new fellow at the table, with an Albertan accent, in cowboy boots, who was ignoring them and kept on talking. He kept talking while the rest of us were playing musical chairs to keep away from the pests. Yet also trying to remain at the table because this new addition to our gathering was so interesting. Hello, whoever you are. Not sure who that is, but hi. Hope you enjoy this reading. It's been fun for me so far. He had this odd habit of speaking about the deepest questions to whoever was at the table, most of them new acquaintances, as though he were just making small talk. Or, if he did do small talk, the interval between, how do you know Wodek and Estera, or I was a beekeeper once, so I'm used to them, and more serious topics would be in nanoseconds. One might hear such questions discussed at parties where professors and professionals gather, but usually the conversation would remain between the two specialists in the topic. Often a corner, or if shared with the whole group, it was usually not without someone preening. But this Peterson, though erudite, didn't come across as pedant. Obviously, pedantic is what that word is referring to. He didn't come off as a pedant. He had the enthusiasm of a kid who had just learned something new and had to share it. Just had to share it. He seemed to be assuming, as a child would, before learning how dull adults can become, that if he thought something was interesting, then so might others. And that's I typically find that to be actually true. If there's something that I'm extremely super interested in, then people either really enjoy it and they're interested too, or they freaking hate it and they're like, why are you even, there's something seriously wrong with this guy. And it's whatever, nobody's going to like every single thing that you like, but, it's worth a shot, sucker. Anywho, back to the thing. There was something boyish in the cowboy, in his broaching of subjects, as though we had all grown up together in the same small town or family, and had all been thinking about the very same problem of human existence all along. Peterson wasn't really eccentric. He had sufficient conventional chops, had been a Harvard professor, was a gentleman, as cowboys can be, though he did say damn and bloody a lot, in a rural 1950s kind of way. But everyone listened, with fascination on their faces, because he was in fact addressing questions of concern that were of concern to everyone at the table. There was something freeing about being with a person so learned, yet speaking in such an unedited way. His thinking was motoric. It seemed, I don't know what that means, motoric? Oh, motoric, like motor, like a motor. Got it. Anyway, it seemed as though he needed to think aloud, to use his motor cortex to think. But that motor also had to run fast to work properly, to get to liftoff. Kind of like a car, you know what I mean? Like you got to get it. You remember those old push starts? You got to push that freaking thing, and you're pushing, then finally it starts up and you can drive off with shame on your face. Yeah, it's... Except this is probably better, probably less shameful and more interesting. If someone challenged or corrected him, he really did seem to like it. He didn't rear up and neigh. He'd say in a kind of folksy way, yeah, bow his head in an involuntary wag, as if he had overlooked something, laughing at himself for overgeneralizing. He appreciated being shown another side of an issue, and it became clear that thinking through a problem was for him a dialogic process. One could not be struck by another unusual thing about it. For an egghead, Peterson was extremely practical. His examples were filled with applications to everyday life. Business management, how to make furniture. He had made his own. It's extremely interesting if you think about it. This dude's like a freaking genius professor. He's just out here making chairs. You know what I'm saying? And in my spare time, I make fucking sofas. You know what I'm saying? Good on you, dude. Designing a simple house, making a room beautiful. Now an internet meme, or in another specific case related to education, creating an online writing project that kept minority students from dropping out of school by getting them to do a kind of psychoanalytic exercise on themselves, in which they would free associate about their past, present, and future, now known as the self-authoring program. I was always especially fond of a Midwestern prairie type who had come from a farm where they'd learned all about nature, or from a very small town, and who have worked with their hands to make things, spent long periods outside in the harsh elements, and are often self-educated and go to university against odds. I found them to be unlike their sophisticated but somewhat denatured urban counterparts, for whom higher education was preordained, and for that reason sometimes taken for granted, or thought of as not as an end in itself, but simply as a stage in life, in the service of career advancement. These Westerners were different, self-made, unentitled, hands-on, neighborly, and less precious than many of their big city peers, who increasingly spend their lives outdoors, manipulating symbols on computers. This cowboy psychologist seemed to care about a thought only if it might in some way be helpful to someone. And that's so obvious when you listen to Jordan talk. He really cares, you know what I mean? He really wants to help people. And it's like, that's just his natural mode. You know, his brain is just constantly ticking to solve problems for people who can't do it for themselves. And that, my friends, is it freaking dope. We became friends. As a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst who loves literature, I was drawn to him because here is a clinician who had given himself a great book education, and not only loved the soulful Russian novels, philosophy, and ancient mythology, but who also seemed to treat them as his most treasured inheritance. But he also did illuminating statistical research on personality and temperament, and had studied neuroscience. Though trained as a behaviorist, he was powerfully drawn to the psychoanalysis with its focus on dreams, archetypes, and the persistence of childhood conflicts in the adult, and the role of defenses and rationalization in everyday life. He was also an outlier in being the only member of the research-oriented Department of Psychology at the University of Toronto who also kept a clinical practice. On my visits, our conversations began with banter and laughter. That was the small-town Peterson from the Alberta hinterland, his teenage years right out of the movie Fubar, welcoming you into his home. The house had been gutted by Tammy, his wife, and himself, and turned into perhaps the most fascinating and shocking middle-class home I'd ever seen. They had art, some carved masks, and abstract portraits, but they were overwhelmed by a huge collection of original socialist realist paintings of Lenin and the early communists commissioned by the USSR. Not long after the Soviet Union fell, and most of the world breathed a sigh of relief. Like, oh my God, they're not going to kill us all, thank you. Sweet. Peterson began purchasing this propaganda for a song online. Paintings lionizing the Soviet revolutionary spirit completely filled every single wall. The ceilings, even the bathrooms. The paintings were not there because Jordan had any totalitarian sympathies, but because he wanted to remind himself of something he knew, and he knew he and everyone would rather forget, that over 1 million people were murdered in the name of utopia. And you got to think about that. When they say history, if we don't learn from history, it will repeat itself. It's true, man. If you're forgetting history, even the horrible stuff that's happening, you forget about that stuff, and it's going to really surprise you when that stuff comes back over and over and over again. Because if you don't learn from something, you think about it, if you don't learn from something, then you forget about it. You forget about it, boom, it rears its ugly head again. You know what I'm saying? Unless you're talking about like diarrhea or some sort of lol cow. I don't know. The point being that, you know, it's pretty obvious that if you don't remember stuff, you forget it, and it's going to show up again and screw your world up. It took some getting used to this semi-haunted house decorated by a delusion that had practically destroyed mankind, but it was eased by his wonderful and unique spouse, Tammy, who was all in, who embraced and encouraged this unusual need for expression. These paintings provided a visitor with the first window onto the full extent of Jordan's concern about the full extent of Jordan's concern about our human capacity for evil in the name of good, and psychological mystery of self-deception. How can a person deceive himself and get away with it? An interest we share. And then there were also the hours we'd spend discussing what I might call a lesser problem. Lesser because rarer. The human capacity for evil for the sake of evil. The joy some people take in destroying others, captured famously by the 17th century English poet John Milton in Paradise Lost. Let's go ahead and look that one up just because, it's additive to the overall feeling of this right now. So it's Paradise Lost. Milton. You guys aren't all probably waxing poetic people like myself. I really enjoy poetry, but I'll keep it brief for those who are going to find this rather irritating. Paradise Lost is an epic poem by John Milton that explores the biblical story of the fall of man, focusing on themes of free will, temptation, and redemption. Summary: Paradise Lost is a monumental epic poem. Monumental epic poem. I like that. Monumental epic poem written by John Milton, first published in 1667 and later revised in 1674. The poem consists of 12 books and is written in blank verse. It narrates the biblical story of the fall of Adam and Eve, detailing their temptation by Satan and their subsequent expulsion from the Garden of Eden. The poem begins in medias res, with Satan and his fallen angels cast into hell after their rebellion against God. Milton's portrayal of Satan is complex, often seen as both a tragic figure and a symbol of rebellion against divine authority. Themes: free will and obedience. A central theme of the poem is the tension between free will and obedience to God. Milton explores the consequence of Adam and Eve's choice to disobey God, emphasizing the moral implications of their actions. The nature of evil. The poem delves into the nature of evil, particularly through the character of Satan, who embodies ambition and defiance. Milton's depiction of Satan has led to various interpretations, with some readers viewing him as a sympathetic character. Redemption and hope. Despite the tragic fall of humanity, Paradise Lost ends on a note of hope, suggesting the possibility of redemption through Christ. This theme reflects Milton's belief in the potential for salvation and the importance of faith. Anywho, there's that. Thought I'd just give you guys kind of like a short breakdown of what that was and whatnot. I'm struggling so hard not to pick my freaking nose right now. I just want you guys to know that. What's going on over there? Oh, I don't know. That's weird. He couldn't have been picking his nose. I know that because he wouldn't do that. God, I need to grow my hair back. Like a shaved cat. It is what it is. Leave me alone. And so we chat and have our tea in his kitchen underworld, walled by this odd art collection, a visual marker of his earnest quest to move beyond simplistic ideology, left or right, and not repeat mistakes of the past. After a while, there was nothing peculiar about taking tea in the kitchen, discussing family issues, one's latest reading, with these ominous pictures hovering. It was just living in the world as it is, or was, or in some places, still can be. In Jordan's first and only book before this one, Maps of Meaning, he shares his profound insights into the universal themes of world mythology and explains how all cultures have created stories to help us grapple with and ultimately map the chaos into which we are thrown at birth. This chaos is everything that is unknown. This chaos is everything that is unknown to us, in any unexplored territory that we must traverse, be it in the world outside or the psyche within. Combining evolution, the neuroscience of emotion, some of the best Jung, some of Freud, and much of the great works of Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, Solzhenitsyn, Eliade, Newman, Piaget, Fry, and Frankl, Maps of Meaning, published nearly 2 decades ago, shows Jordan's wide-ranging approach to understanding how human beings and the human brain deal with the archetypal situation that arises whenever we, in our daily lives, must face something we do not understand. The brilliance of this book is in its demonstration of how rooted this situation is in evolution, our DNA, our brains, and our most ancient stories. And he shows that these stories have survived because they still provide guidance in dealing with uncertainty and the unavoidable unknown. One of the many virtues of this book you are reading now is that it provides an entry point into Maps of Meaning, which is a highly complex work because Jordan was working out his approach to psychology as he wrote it. But it was foundational because no matter how different our genes or life experiences may be, or how differently our plastic brains are wired by our experience, we all have to deal with the unknown, and we all attempt to move from chaos to order. And this is why many of the rules in this book, being based on maps of meaning, have an element of universality to them. Maps of Meaning was sparked by Jordan's agonized awareness as a teenager growing up in the midst of the Cold War that much of mankind seemed on the verge of blowing up the planet to defend their various identities. He felt that he had to understand how could it be. Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to pause this. I totally forgot about something. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry.